It's November 3rd, 2020. After being declared the winner of the presidential election, President Donald J. Trump won his re-election campaign. Not long after, Democratic candidate former Vice President Joseph R. Biden refused to accept the election results, claiming that many votes are still due to come in by mail, expressing that it would take weeks, if not months, to have an accurate decision of who truly won the presidency. After several weeks, the Democratic candidate continued to challenge the results, maintaining there were still hundreds of thousands of votes to still be tallied in key swing states. Many governors from states such as California, Oregon, and Washington banded together, declaring themselves independent until President Trump stepped down as commander-in-chief. The federal government immediately responded to this action by declaring all three state governors to step down immediately. This call went unanswered as the governors of each state activated their National Guard and police components into service in order to keep federal troops from coming into the state to remove them by force. Feeling emboldened by the eastern states, New York followed in their steps and declared itself a part of the separatist coalition that formed in order to challenge the commander-in-chief's claim to the presidency. New York then proceeded to activate its own National Guard component while maintaining most of its troops on standby. As other state governors who were sympathetic with the coalition's goals saw major states joining the separatist coalition, many more joined in hopes that the pressure of avoiding civil war would be enough for the federal government to accept their demands and remove the president from power. States like Maryland, New Jersey, and Virginia joined the coalition and activated their own National Guards. It's important, however, to note that many soldiers did not answer the governor's orders, and many fled to more conservative states in order to avoid being arrested. As time went by, the coalition kept growing in numbers. This was helped by the federal government's inability to show any force against the coalition. Even though not a single shot had been fired, almost half the country's population was now in coalition hands. Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Illinois also joined within days of each other. In a surprising move of force, California deployed its troops to occupy Nevada. The governor of Nevada had little choice in the matter due to being caught off guard. Soldiers moved in and some local armories were found empty by the time coalition troops arrived. In a few days after occupation, citizens who saw the coalition troops as foreign invaders started sabotaging military equipment by cutting fuel lines and blowing up gas stations in an effort to deny the coalition resources. There were no casualties in any of these attacks, but tensions continued to rise as more and more conservative states called for action from the federal government. After multiple calls of action, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming activated their own National Guards in an effort to deter coalition troops from entering their territory. They placed them along Idaho's borders with orders to shoot any coalition personnel who refused to disarm before crossing state lines. The federal government, having lost most of its credibility and authority, remained quiet about this new alliance and did not order governors who took part to step down. Even in their limited numbers, the alliance, who now refer to themselves as the Unified States, were able to deter further advance from coalition forces. As more time went by, New Mexico and Colorado officially joined the separatist coalition. As more states began to realize that civil war may now be imminent, many felt that choosing a side was inevitable. At this point, the unified states were weak in comparison. Many governors saw that joining the coalition may be their only real option, while others still hoped that the federal government would deal with the situation in a peaceful manner. Most of the fleet and regular army troops were stationed overseas, which limited the federal government's ability to do anything about the coalition. As long as the situation remained peaceful, it appeared that the government refused to react to the secession of states. In an unexpected turn of events, Texas declared its alliance to the Unified States, which brought in several divisions of much-needed troops for the Union Army. Also, the Unified States began sponsoring any militias willing to fight on their side. This helped supplement their low numbers in the northern states. Texas has sent out a call to activate all of its guard components, including local sheriffs, to patrol along its western border for any coalition troops. Not long after, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania joined the coalition, many believing that the separatists still held the upper hand. Even though the coalition now had the majority of the US population under their control, they noticed many military members failed to show up when activated by the state. The coalition had a hard time maintaining order in rural areas where the population was armed. There were widespread riots, and several police departments and armies were burned down by citizens who rebelled against the coalition. After seeing the way most citizens acted while under coalition control, those who had mostly conservative and rural areas decided that siding with the Unified States was their only option. In states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma, citizens began demanding their governors to join the Unified States in an effort to show separatists they weren't willing to be bullied into submission. This brought but a few more guard units and militias, but nowhere near close to rival the coalition army. The coalition also gained Arizona and Utah when California once again moved its troops in an effort to keep those states under separatist control. Other states like Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia, and Florida, with more conservative governments, also pledged support for the Unified States, though they were unable to commit any troops in order to keep their more politically diverse population from rebelling. It wasn't long after the coalition invaded neighboring states that the rest of the uncommitted states made their decision. West Virginia and Kentucky were forced to join the coalition while separatist troops invaded, and forced governors to join their efforts. However, local troops once again failed to activate once called upon by the invading separatists. The states that joined the Union were also struggling to raise troops due to many generals ordering troops to stand down while governors said otherwise. With the nation's capital now deep in coalition territory, the federal government formally endorsed the Union states, declaring that those who opposed any orders from Union military personnel would be charged with sedition. 2 Union Army units pushed towards Washington, D.C. in a surprise attack, which officially began the Civil War. 2,000 infantry units along with light armored vehicles were able to push back several thousand coalition units who were caught by surprise. The Union Army suffered less than 100 casualties in total, while separatists suffered 351, and a further 60 soldiers were captured. The Union Army now controlled the U.S. Capitol, but was being challenged by local population, who overwhelmingly supported the coalition effort. The coalition army had been holding back using force for weeks, but this was their opportunity to counterattack by going around Union forces. The Union Army was strengthened along the front line. This enabled an entire coalition infantry unit to bypass their lines and capture North Carolina by gaining control of its capital and government infrastructure. Florida began mustering more volunteer troops and militias in order to re-establish a supply route to cut off troops in Washington, D.C. and Virginia. Determined to take the initiative back, West Coast separatist troops attacked Union troops in Idaho without warning, and in less than 48 hours, the entire states of Idaho and Montana were under coalition control. The Union Army took massive casualties, losing an entire unit during the retreat. It is estimated somewhere around 900 casualties were inflicted and 200 troops were captured. After the major defeat for the Union Army in the northern states, things went from bad to worse when an all-out attack in every front by the coalition began. The militias were unable to hold the line against regular troops, and the few military divisions that were in the Union Army were completely outnumbered against the separatist troops. The unit, which was already struggling to maintain control of Washington, D.C., was pushed back all the way to South Carolina, and were able to link up with militia troops and hold a defensive line good enough to stall the coalition's advance. The troops who were stationed in Texas were the only ones able to push back on the coalition lines, and with the help of local populace, the Union troops were able to capture New Mexico and Colorado. Texan Union troops continued to push on along the southern U.S. border. The goal was to reach the city of San Diego and establish a route to the Pacific Ocean. The federal government had recalled some of the fleet in an effort to boost Union troops, but it would take weeks, if not months, until the fleet arrives, and even now it was still unclear whose side the admirals abroad were truly willing to fight for. Nevertheless, Union troops fought ferociously. San Diego citizens were sympathetic to the Union and continued to sabotage separatist troops, keeping them from being able to supply their frontline forces. The Unified States also continued to sponsor militias even in deep coalition territory. Airdrops of explosives, weapons, and ammunition littered the areas where the support for the Union was widespread. While the push for San Diego was going as planned on the eastern seaboard, things began to look dire, as the overwhelming numbers of coalition forces began pushing Union troops further back. This was further made worse by local instability with the local population. The separatists outnumbered the Union 2-1 and were able to maintain a consistent pace in their advance, as the Union troops barely had time to pack up supplies as they retreated further south. With an established route to the Pacific Ocean, all that was necessary was to hold San Diego until whatever part of the fleet was coming to arrive. In an unexpected turn of events, a militia unit who was embedded behind coalition lines was able to get enough citizens to uprise against the coalition troops in Boise, Idaho. The city was captured and troops from the Seattle and Portland region were deployed in response. But while progress was being made by Union forces in the U.S. West Coast, the East Coast was suffering defeat after defeat. The Florida militia was almost annihilated after being caught behind supply lines and unable to make an effective retreat. Those who were not killed were captured, and the few who survived stayed near Tampa with their backs to the Gulf, waiting for destruction. Union West Coast troops decided it was time to strike back. Major offensives were launched in New Mexico and Wyoming. Though successful, they were still unable to regain their lost territory. East Coast Command ordered the retreat of the militia from Florida and held a defensive line in the state's capital of Tallahassee. The Union forces in Tallahassee were able to mount an effective defense when several artillery units began bombardment of infrastructure, denying the separatists roads and train lines. This slowed down their advance to a halt. After weeks of fighting, the militia-controlled boys was able to defeat the coalition forces with the support of local law enforcement and citizens. Impressed with the victory, Union Command advised that if they were to keep up their resistance, they would be dedicating significant resources to close the gap between Idaho and Union forces. The militia was able to muster more volunteers to hold the city from being taken by the coalition. The main militia forces were now pushing south in an effort to flank the coalition front lines. Keeping their promise, Union Command ordered several divisions to attack and re-establish a connection with the militia forces. The attack was successful and almost all of Nevada was taken from the coalition. This was the first time the Unified States were in the offensive, as even the East Coast was being held effectively. It seemed that the tides were beginning to turn. The Union finally took the offensive, and even though they were still outnumbered in the East Coast, the Eastern Command was able to maintain a defensive line, creating a stalemate in which both sides were unable to gain any ground. In a surprising turn of events, Mexican military allied with the coalition and invaded the undefended its southern border. Union troops were dispatched to confront the invaders, but much territory was lost by the time they were able to confront the enemy. Union forces were then able to push and envelop an entire unit of coalition. Being attacked on both sides, the coalition division stood no chance and was annihilated. Meanwhile, in Missouri, coalition troops were able to push back the Union line, but were once again stopped as the Union troops were able to dig in and hold back the advance. Feeling the tide turning, local militias in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont banded together to retake the Northeast. Union command took notice of this action and began supplying the militias with proper weapons. The militias were able to capture almost all of northern Maine and some areas of northern New Hampshire. Even with the alliance between Mexico and the coalition, it seems that the Union could still fight effectively, as most of the population were beginning to turn sympathetic to the unified states. As the situation was developing in the East Coast, reports of multiple ships off the coast of California started coming in. The coalition may have yet again called upon a new ally to fight against the Union. However, once ships came closer to San Francisco Harbor, the coalition soldiers were bombarded and fled as they saw thousands of Chinese Marines and tanks disembark their ships. They were able to push coalition forces off of the city. There are reports as well of another detachment of Chinese ships who captured the city of Anchorage in Alaska, a city that was loyal to Union forces. China saw the opportunity it had to take on weaker United States. Many wonder how it is that our Pacific Fleet was unable to warn us of this attack, but it was clear that even they must have been confused as to who to communicate to. With a fractured government and amidst the chaos, the message may have been sent, but nobody was there to listen to it.